Hello, everyone. Today I'm super happy because we are talking about a topic that all of you really have a lot of questions about and are super interested on. And today we are talking about living fully and working remotely, everything about work-life balance. And so while some of you arrive, I can already see that many of you are saying hi and where are you from? So thank you everyone for joining from wherever you are at in the world. And just some housekeeping announcements for anyone that cannot watch this conversation completely. It says somebody saying that I'm echoing, so I hope now my audio is better. But for everyone that is joining today, we will have the recording available for everyone on YouTube, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, so feel free to watch the content later. If you have any questions, you can add them to the chat. We will choose some of them to be featured in the Q&A. And I guess that's it. And let's just start with this conversation. Today we will have Justin Haralan from Tulsa Remote, which I will bring to the stage right now. Hi, Justin.
Hello, hello.
So just for everyone to know, Justin is the managing director of Tulsa Remote, where he leads the largest US relocation incentive program with over 2,500 members. And this program is recognized by Fast Company for its innovative approach to remote work, attraction, and economic development in Tulsa. And he lives obviously in Tulsa with his wife, Megan. And thank you so much, Justin, for joining us today.
It's great to be here with you. Thanks for having me.
And I will also bring to the stage Kevin, who is our CEO. And Kevin, thank you so much for being here today also.
Of course, yeah, no, super excited to talk and share Justin's insights with our community.
Amazing. So just so everyone knows, I will leave Kevin and Justin to have this fireside chat. I will be in the backstage, so if anyone has any question or anything, feel free to add them to the chat. And yeah, I will leave it to you guys, and thank you so much for sharing all your insights today.
Thanks so much, Justine, and welcome everyone. Welcome, Justin. Super excited to have this conversation with Justin today. Obviously, as Justine mentioned, he's the mastermind, let's say, behind Tulsa Remote, this incredible program that's helping so many people, both locally and remotely. And we think it's really fascinating and really interesting. But before we cover all that today, one of the major things we want to dive into is a topic that, for me personally, and I think for Justin probably as well, is near and dear to both our professional and our personal lives, which is work-life balance. I think that's one of the main things that anyone who's worked remotely has either felt successful in or maybe struggled with or somewhere between, hence the kind of balance component of work-life balance. And over the last 3 years, especially kind of through the pandemic and everything else, as remote work has grown in popularity and acceptance, it's become more of a topic that people are interested in really understanding and diving into strategies and how it not just affects our personal lives, but also organizations and how they can help employees, help companies, help their culture thrive in a situation like this. So let's face it, there's not one solution, but that's what we're here to talk about today, is how we're currently coping with this, what the options are, what are the best practices. And so let's let's dive right in, Justin. Let's get into the details of it. I'm gonna throw a question your way, and let's start with the big one. How do you define work-life balance?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me. This is a conversation I'm really looking forward to, and you're someone that I look up to a lot on the topic, and just looking forward to diving in together. For me, I define work-life balance as just that, trying to find a healthy balance. Obviously, work is paying the bills and allows us to live this life that we want in many ways outside of work. But the more that we can kind of prioritize the things that are most important to us and leverage work to align with the type of person that we want to be outside of work, both structurally, but also from a value standpoint, I think that all of us have decisions and choices to make about where we're choosing to do our work. But the more we can kind of align that with the life that we want, I think it creates healthier humans and allows us to really feel good showing up to the workplace.
Hmm. You mentioned their alignment, and I'm, I want to come back to that, but I think, one question I had is, how has, for you maybe personally, or for people who've gone through your program, how has that definition of kind of work-life balance either changed or adapted over time with this concept of remote work? Have you seen something that's been kind of a driver there, or what have you picked up on that's been really interesting?
Yeah, well, for me, psychologically, you can kind of go back to March of 2020, where we were all, the majority of us had roles that were kind of turned on its head. And
Hmm.
now we're stuck inside and watching Tiger King in our pajamas as we're trying to feed our kids and do a math lesson with them. And I don't know if you remember this world, but I try to forget it, but this is the reality. We were all
Yeah.
living it. So, for me, that is a big moment because we all had to kind of realize what matters most to us. And I think in the
Mm,
midst of a pandemic where there's so much loss and death and just almost survival mentality,
mhm,
I think it causes a lot of us to just question what are we actually doing here? And there's
mhm,
actually Wall Street Journal research that backs this up that shows that about 40% of us have actually stated that work matters less to us today than it did 3 years ago. And I
mm,
think you cannot separate this massive global pandemic that we all experienced together and that research based fact, which causes us to then say, okay, if work isn't the most important thing to me, then what am I actually doing spending all my time working?
yeah.
And I think it kind of pulls out the beauty of remote work that I know we're going to get into, but allows us to kind of uncover that together. And I've actually tried to change the order of those two words, Kevin, where instead of work-life balance, I think none of us would say that work comes first. I don't think. I certainly would never say that my work is more important to me than my wife or kids
Mhm,
or family. And so let's make it about life work balance and actually having life come first and think about the things that we want in life. And then how does work actually support the life that we want to live? And for me, that's the big shift that has happened over the last 3 years as the pandemic has kind of opened up our perspective about what matters most in our day to day.
yeah, and I think that I appreciate you referencing Tiger King, because that all came rushing back. But I think what's interesting is I know you and I share, for example, an interest in sports outside of work, right? And I think one of the things that I'll say, maybe to kind of layer on there, is that historically it's been, sort of imagine a world without remote work. But for me, it's been a challenge in the past, before I started working remotely, to find time to do these other things I love, whether it was family, whether it was hobbies, whether it was, just even taking time, right? Resting, doing anything, maybe but work,
Mhm.
whatever that might be. And I think your lens on kind of flipping the script so that it's life work balance is at a minimum such a perfect mindset shift. And if we think about the way that reframes how we not only prioritize our values, but how we think about alignment, right? And how that then can translate into work instead of the other way around, right? Instead of trying to pull out of work, maybe pushing into work to say, I've got 3 hours of work right now. I'm going to focus so that I can do these other things, so that I can get back to what I value and what I prioritize. And it's not valuing work. It's keeping this kind of structured or ranked list of, okay, but my family or whatever those things may be are first and foremost. And I'm wondering, for you as a remote worker, how do you think about managing that challenge of keeping that list kind of intact, or keeping those values represented through your work?
Yeah, well, for me, I think there's a number of things that you can do. First, I encourage people to do a quick time audit. I mean, we can very easily, especially this day and age, look at a calendar and see how we're spending our time. Are are the ways that you're in your mind prioritizing life actually showing up in the calendar that you're setting for yourself?
Hmm.
And maybe for me, there's a lot of evening events, social things. We're often hosting folks in Tulsa and bringing them in for visits and things like that. It's just a matter of kind of setting limits around how many evening events there are that I'm
Hmm.
allowed per week, because I know that doing more than that kind of butts up against what I have in terms of values for life priorities. Or maybe it's just ensuring that, you know, there's a certain number of hours that are going to cause you to then get burned out. And when you're burned out, you just sleep all weekend, which means that you're not pouring into your kids or your partner or your friends. And, you know, just everybody's going to have a different answer to that question, Kevin. But for me, it's just being aware of what are you actually hoping comes to life in your schedule, and then looking at your calendar and saying, where do I need to make adjustments here to support that? And it's really easy to visualize if you want to get more tactical, like doing some color coding or things like that. Google Calendar has different bar charts that you can see based on every color. I mean, just doing that quick audit can often showcase for you how is that alignment happening?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because one of the things I take away when I hear kind of the description of a calendar audit, let's call it, is energy, right? It's where, you know, like you said, if I get to the weekend and I've got nothing left because I'm just gassed and I haven't balanced effectively the week or my energy levels throughout the week, what can I put into my life if I'm just using that time to, quote, you know, maybe recover or just sort of like try to recuperate. And I guess for you, how do you, you know, when you look at that calendar audit, is there a particular thing that you're doing to try to manage that energy? Is it just number of X type of events, maybe number of fireside chats, number of meetings, right? Is it some particular thing that, you know, hey, this gives me energy, or is it that it maybe depletes my energy, which will take away from these other aspects of my life? I'm curious, like, how do you run through that audit?
Yeah, sure. For me, one thing that I've really found to be helpful is really protecting Fridays. So I like to end my week and kind of look ahead to the next week in a way that's really protected on focus time, kind of cleaning out the inbox, going into the weekend, knowing that there's not these things that are lingering is the hope. And then looking ahead to the week ahead to say, how can I prepare for what's coming? And that's become a game changer, where it's not a 4-day work week, but my meetings are consolidated in a way that are really just happening during those 4 days, which allows for that flexibility. And at times, even just breathing space to reflect, clean things up, and then get into the weekend with a clear mind. And that makes a big difference. One thing that I do want to state in this conversation is there's an assumption in our conversation that you're also working for an organization and or for leaders that are supporting some of the things that we're naming, which I think we should get into. But you know, there's also at a personal level, before we get into like organizational or leadership things that people could be doing, at a personal level, you might honestly have a wake-up call during that audit that says, the person that I want to be or the life that I want to be living is actually in direct conflict with where I'm working, which causes you to make some very difficult decisions about where you're working. And I just want to name that reality, because it certainly is not the case everywhere that people are going to get what you and I talk about today. That doesn't mean that you can't get it. And I think that we have to be able to kind of distinguish those two realities.
Totally. Yeah. And, you know, it's really interesting that you kind of do not a 4-day work week, like you said, but let's call it 4-day kind of shared work week and day to kind of just in time there. You know, interestingly enough, and I think a perfect segue into how can organizations support this broader concept. You know, one of the things that we do at We Work Remotely is we also don't do a 4-day work week. What we do is effectively what you just described, but we do it company wide, where Monday through Thursday, everything's, you know, we're 90% asynchronous, but we can have meetings, one-on-ones, etc. Friday is our no meeting Friday. And that gives everyone the space to do exactly what you just described. If you need to go heads down on some you know, docs, some writing, some work, you know, some very intense kind of deep work, we built that space specifically for you, and we're not going to interrupt it. That's a rule of the organization. But I think it's a perfect question is, what are some of the things that we think about when, you know, if you do come to that misalignment question? Let's maybe start with the question of, if you do find that you do your audit and you go, this isn't aligned with the way I want to live, and I'm not designing the life through this or with this organization in a way that I think will be successful. First, let's talk about, how do you deal with that? How can you handle maybe that disconnect? Are there strategies? Are there ways of communicating your needs and values what are your thoughts on how to break that barrier maybe?
Yeah, well, I'd go at it first with the assumption that your boss or the person you might talk to about your schedule is a good human being that has empathy and wants you to live out your best life.
Yes.
So let's just go with that first, which I hope is the case for everybody. But I think very seldomly are you going to show up and say, here's what I'm really wanting out of life, prioritizing these other things, and here's where I want you to hold me accountable to the work, which also goes hand in hand. And in exchange for this flexibility or asynchronous schedule or whatever, I also am going to ask you to hold me really accountable to the outcomes that I have, not when I'm doing it, but the outcomes that I'm working towards. And in exchange, here's all the things that I'm going to be able to do as a human being, which is then going to make me more productive, more satisfied, stick around the organization longer. I mean, doesn't this sound beautiful? Everybody wants a boss like that, a manager like that, that's supporting them as a human, not just as somebody who's showing up and doing work at a desk. And, if you have that type of manager, then I think you can go in trusting that they want you to be your best self. Now, full stop. If you don't, then I think you have some questions to ask yourself. Like I just referenced, there's plenty of good people out there and good organizations that hold up the values that you probably have in mind. And we also, as employees, I think have more ability than ever to choose where we are now. So maybe you have to make that choice, and that might be a tough decision, and maybe it takes time, but knowing that your values are aligning with the person you're working for, the place you're working at, is a beautiful, freeing feeling. And all these things that come with it certainly require the support of a manager and organization that help you live it out.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think it's really important, like you said, that you come in. So much of not just what we do at work, but obviously personally as well, is about how we communicate it and and how we approach these conversations. I think oftentimes where there is a disconnect, there's maybe a quick step to, all right, we need to kind of battle this out. But really, it's more about, it's kind of the same as work-life balance alignment. We're trying to encourage more alignment with, our boss, our manager, our leader. And the best way to drive that is to oftentimes be transparent and honest. And one of the ways we find that, just that we work remotely specifically, is we do a thing there's sometimes called user manuals, user guides, whatever you might want to put a spin on it. The concept being that it's a way to communicate kind of how you work best, what your values are both personally and professionally, how you think about problems, signs that you may be getting burnt out, which ultimately oftentimes is the biggest fallout of the lack of work-life balance, right? It's that burnout, it's the disconnection from work. And I think, so when you're having those conversations, keeping that in the back of your mind is also, I want to communicate this to my manager so that they know, hey, I'm heading in this direction where, like you said, maybe you're not ultimately going to be able to, be a fit for an organization, or maybe they can say, oh, I'm realizing there's some small adjustments that could be made. And, I think oftentimes it's harder for organizations, maybe not managers, but organizations at large, to see, okay, what are the real benefits? Are there actually benefits to driving this work-life balance, especially in remote work, where there's, all these sort of stereotypes of, oh, they're not working, they're doing laundry, they're doing other things, they've got two or three jobs, they're, quote, overworking. Like in that case, I think, how do you, I guess I'm wondering for you then, or generally, what are your thoughts on how to communicate that value to finding work-life balance and encouraging it as like a cultural component of an organization?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think trust is the engine that makes remote work possible. We have to have open lines of communication and trust amongst each other, because we don't now have the proximity that you once had, that maybe created that trust originally in this office world of the past. But I think that it really comes back to open communication, trusting that your boss or manager or colleague wants the best for you, and being willing to state the things that you're wanting in life. As a manager, I think that supporting those people and hearing them out and showing empathy, and then creating a schedule that allows for really clear expectations up front, which I think is the name of the game here, and centering the conversation that you're having with your people around those outcomes over the hours that they're working. That I think is what's most important, which is going to still allow the person to do the job that they signed up for, but also in a way that, supports whatever they might have going on in life.
And I guess, if we think about that point around different schedules and time, I think that's super important, especially because there's, like you said, there's these built-in assumptions, and some of them are that, for example, the 9 to 5 is like the way to work, right? And it's a pretty it's a pretty dated idea, and I think we're slowly picking away at that and starting to understand that, there's these concepts of being, for example, like a cycler, someone who might work for 2 hours, then take their kids to soccer or something, right? And then come back and work 3 more hours, and then take a break and go for a workout. And when we think about that, like work-life integration, what is the kind of role that companies can play? Not so much so putting less the impetus on the employee or the individual, but what can organizations do to create that environment so that it's not only transparent, like you said, but that there is there's assumed positive intent, and there's support for these different ways of working? How can organizations approach that to really foster like this future of work and remote work?
Yeah, well, I'm probably preaching to the choir on a lot of this, but as organizational leaders, if you're listening to this, I'd have a couple of recommendations. First and foremost, I mean, if you don't have a policy around what you expect in terms of where you work and when you work, I would name it. I think that doing so allows for equitable access to information and structure across the organization, and not doing so creates different expectations for different employees that often hinges upon what their manager allows. And that can lead to people just not feeling like they're being treated fairly. A lot of bias can show up in that essence. So I think first and foremost, if you haven't already, you're a couple years behind, but I would name what your remote work policy is and what you're allowing, and have that come to life in a way that supports your organizational values. So that would be number one. Second, creating a culture of over documentation and transparency. I think now that we don't have the proximity, we don't have the water cooler talk or looking over somebody's shoulder or passing somebody in a hallway to ask how this project's going. And especially if you're hybrid and some of that is happening and you don't want somebody who's working remotely to be at a disadvantage, I think over documenting meetings, following up in an email, creating Google Docs, just putting it all out there so that the person working at home is not at a disadvantage as it relates to information as somebody else, or maybe somebody who's meeting up at a coffee shop with the organizational leader. It's all a level playing field. Ensuring that the person that's working at home has the same work experience as somebody in the office or that might live closer to colleagues is incredibly important. I would also go back to the empathy piece, just trying to understand, not making judgment calls. You mentioned a lot of the headlines about people that are working remotely. I mean, like I said, trust is key to this. And then the last piece, especially as it relates to life-work balance, I know that happy hours and kind of get-togethers and things like that are often something that organizations do to build culture. And I also know that remote work or this hybrid piece is often criticized for how are we going to get to know each other? How are we going to build culture? A big thing that I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do you create those opportunities to bump into each other if you do have some proximity to each other in a city that doesn't actually seep into personal hours? I mean, the like 5 o'clock happy hour as a time to build culture, in my opinion, is kind of a way of the past. How do we actually get to know each other in ways that also supports what we want to be in life and protect those personal hours in the way that we're actually structuring work obligations or work requirements? So of course, optional things are great. Mix it up. Don't always, do it in the after hours. Give choices for folks, and then don't force those social relationships in the workplace, because oftentimes you can get those in plenty of other places. So those are a few recommendations I would have. They're easier said than implemented, but I do think that culture is a big piece, over documentation, and then of course creating a policy that supports all those things that you want to bring true.
Yeah, those are all the same, that I would recommend 100%. And I think the core of that is, I think it's often understated that so much of it has to really come from the top of the organization. Maybe not the top meaning top down, meaning it has to be structurally integrated in these ways that you're talking about, where it's
right.
It's a component of your culture, not an afterthought. And I feel as though when when the pandemic hit and we all first started making these shifts that were happening, that was the challenge. And I think that's what initially a lot of people associated with their first time remote working was in that way, where it was chaos. And those of us who have done it for, I've been doing it for over a decade, have seen that, yes, that is sometimes where remote work can accidentally end up, with either the wrong organizational structures or kind of the wrong mental models. But ultimately, with the right strategies, it can end up in a much healthier place that is very intentional, which is often the word that is, I think, probably in remote work bingo, that's probably the one that hits the most. But it's true for a reason, right? Because it's the one that lands all the time and is consistent. And I think this, when we think about the strategy, is kind of, one last component here on the organizational side that I'm thinking about is, what are some of the interesting things for you? You mentioned, for example, 4-day work week as a concept. Are there any, we were talking, meeting days. Are there any other interesting strategies that companies can employ outside of these structural components that are maybe at the forefront, that you see as, and they don't have to be data backed, but that you see as potentially future options to help drive more of this life-work balance?
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be different for every company based on how big it is. What is the kind of the proximity? How is that dispersed across the country or even globe? Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we really tried to do is center systems that also support that over documentation and allow for that tracking to come to life, kind of regardless of where you are. So little tools like Slack, which I'm sure a lot of you are on, or Asana, to kind of help projects come to life. That is a way that our organization has really evolved, especially as we are working more remotely, to allow for that over documentation and transparency as things are progressing, and for folks to do that asynchronously, where you can kind of move through projects or communication at your own pace. And I think allowing for systems to reinforce the policies that you just emphasized that organizations should have in place, and the values that you want to come to life, I think then you're getting into the ground floor work. Like, how are you actually going to make this happen? So having tools, Notion is another one that I know that organizations use. Having tools that support that type of work-life balance and help that schedule to become asynchronous, I think is another really tactical place that you can start as an organization if you're just kind of starting on this journey.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, well, let's talk about Tulsa then. So when we think about all of these great ideas, both at the organizational level, at the personal level, and then broadly, let's talk about where we live and where we work, even if it is remotely. What, I think people would love to know, and I would love to as well. Like, how is not just the Tulsa program, but how is Tulsa promoting high quality life, putting the life in work-life balance there?
Yeah, well, obviously it's my job to love Tulsa, and I've been here for 19 years, and I'm incredibly biased, but I'm about to get on my Tulsa soapbox because it really is a special place. There are so many cool things happening here, and to me, Tulsa Remote is evidence of this global trend that we're seeing, which is, I do not have to now live in a place to work. So therefore, I can make choices about what matters to me in life and also do my work from there. And I think that having 2,500 people pick up and move to Tulsa from all across the country is evidence of that. The places that we see people moving to Tulsa from the most are these big, expensive cities that also create a lot of real nightmares as it relates to the life-work balance, if we're honest. I mean, you're spending an hour in your car, sometimes each way. It's difficult even just to get to some of these activities that we know are ways that we kind of live out our personal lives. So Tulsa offers a big city. It's 1 million people in the city, and that means there's plenty to do. The outdoor amenities are incredible. One of the best parks in the country is located here in Tulsa. We had 7 James Beard nominations just this year alone, which is more than Vegas. We also have professional sports, and you have all of that without those big city headaches. So it's very affordable to live here. You can get a backyard or a 3rd-car garage or an office in your house, and it's easy to get around. So I think people are kind of waking up to the fact that I can have the best of both worlds. I can have this big city feel, but also the small town love and welcoming arms at a very low cost of living that allows me to kind of be who I am at work, but also help some of those dreams come true in the life aspect of things.
I love that. I think that's, it's such a, exciting and energizing thing to hear, because I think that's where so much of, when you look at historically, why we go to, larger cities, often it's for, it's for kind of resources, right? And that has been centered around work. And I think what we're starting to see, and I actually think you guys are leading the charge on this, honestly, is a shift to, well, when I can work anywhere, where do I want to live that has these other things that, maybe I don't, no knock on any of those major cities. I love most of them, in all honesty, but what if I don't want to, what if that's not for me? What if my family is not close? What if, it doesn't align with my values? And so I think it's amazing to see this flip, almost sort of similar to what we're talking about here in this like life balance in the city itself. And one of the questions I have is around the resources that you guys are thinking about in Tulsa Remotes that embody that idea of really representing it to workers instead of, hey, come to work here. It's, hey, come to live here and you can work here.
Exactly. You think about 10, 15 years ago when Google built the offices or Facebook, and it's their notion was, how do we keep people in the office as long as possible? Put up a cafeteria where you're serving 3 meals, alcohol, ping pong tables, video games, all this, right? Let's work there as long as we can, and everybody's going to become this big family, and we'll love each other, and then we'll also be working all the time. And we're basically doing the exact opposite of that. How do we build community outside of the workforce? And you're going to actually have this playground of an amazing city to do that in, with people that have shared aspects of background, new to a place, remote workers, typically very entrepreneurial and energetic, ready to kind of live their best life. And we can do that together, and ways that we do that, we're community is at the core of what we do. We pay people to move to Tulsa, but that's at the end of the day, really just covering your moving costs. What you're moving for is access to that community where you do not have to be alone and isolated as a remote worker anymore. There are people that want to do that with you. And we have 10 to 15 events every month. And we give access to a co-working space where you can bump shoulders with folks that are also working remotely. And then one of the things we just added is really reinforcing our commitment to mental and physical well-being. We know that moving across the country is very draining emotionally, physically, mentally. And so we want to come alongside people in that move and support them by giving them a $200 a month stipend to use at local gyms, mental health providers, health and wellness spas, to use in your first 3 months. It's kind of like an HSA where you can use it at certain types of vendors. And then if you don't use it, you lose it. But that's 3 months of spending to help you get good habits, again, to help support your life decisions and get you into those good habits. And then we also are giving people access to a new hospital that's in the heart of Greenwood in Black Wall Street in Tulsa, that really helps to break down that decision making for folks that are moving here, because finding a new doctor in a new place is a very tough decision, especially for women, especially for people of color. So it's, again, trust is at the core there. And these are folks that are just ready to welcome folks with open arms. And we're giving everybody a membership to that hospital too, which gives extended hours, virtual visits, et cetera. So different ways that we're coming beside people in ways that we believe everybody should have access to. We believe that good healthcare is a human right, and we want to support in the ways that we can within our Tulsa Remote program, and hopefully set the stage for what all humans deserve at their core. So those are just a couple of ways that we're supporting not only the transition, but trying to plug people into a community here in Tulsa.
That's incredible. I love that idea of supporting so much outside of the work life, right? The co-working space, great. All those are great, but it's putting health both mental and physical, and community first,
Yeah.
which I think, not having all the data in front of me, but I think there's a lot of data that supports that at the end of the day, when we're happier in those two aspects or realms of our lives, we do better work. We feel better about our entire existence across work and life. And that balance actually starts to look balanced, right? And so I think,
totally agree.
yeah, I think it's amazing that you guys are driving so much of that balance. And I think that's unprecedented, honestly, in a lot of ways, and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and one of the ways it shows up and it kind of affirms itself in our conversations with members is you ask people for quotes about like, what has your time in Tulsa been like? And you'll get these super powerful quotes about ways they've plugged into the community, or I'm under 30 as a Black woman buying a house for the first time, or I decided now because I've been able to save up to start this business. All these things are typically have nothing to do with work.
Yeah.
It's like all these things that they were able to untap or get ways they were able to get plugged in, or dreams that they were able to make come true. And it really had nothing to do with the workplace. And I think it's really powerful to just sit and think about that and what that kind of mindset could mean for all of us if we took that orientation and incorporated that into wherever you are, and putting community and involvement and belonging first, and finding your niche outside of the workplace, which then allows you to be more effective and efficient as a human being. And obviously that bleeds into who you are as an employee.
Absolutely. I think, actually, I think that's a perfect place for us to kind of land on, because I think that's so perfectly put in just the way you guys are embodying so much of what we're talking about today. And I think that those stories are a perfect representation of what happens to the point of this conversation when you switch to thinking about it instead of work-life balance, you think about it as life-work balance. And I think, this is it's really amazing program that you guys have built. Obviously, we're huge supporters of it. And I guess I'll leave you with one last question just before we kind of drop and go to Q&A. But in terms of, when we think life-work balance, are there any starters or kind of like starting points that you would give as if you're looking to make this shift to change your life and change your work-life balance, your life-work balance? Where's the best place to start today after this conversation? If you're on and you're listening, how do you get started besides moving to Tulsa, which everyone should do, I think? What are the other options?
Yeah, to me, I would just pause, reflect, ask yourself, what is it that you want to come of your life, and sit in that for a minute. I personally like to turn on some music and just kind of be still and present and see what comes to mind. And for you, that might open your eyes or ears or mind to something that you hadn't yet realized. Start with life. What do you want to be? Where are you right now, and where do you want to go? And then ask yourself how your work is supporting or butting up against that, which I think then kind of starts to outline some key next steps, whether that's conversations with your manager or colleagues or structural changes to your calendar. But first, I think we all need to set purpose in terms of who we want to be. Put life before work, and then think about how does work play into where I want to go in life.
Excellent. I love it. Justin, thank you so much for joining. We're going to,
of course,
we're going to jump to Q&A, but before we do, incredible ideas, thoughts, loved all of this. We'll kick it back to Justine. She's going to come in with some questions from the audience, hopefully for us to continue discussing, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. Loved it.
Hello again. That was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I will send it to my boss later. So we have
on the hook now.
We have a few questions, some comments also from the people that are watching. But for anyone that is watching right now, this is the moment. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, drop them in the comments so that we can talk about them. So I have one. And it says, I hope this conversation turns to those of us who do not have much to any control over our calendar or schedule. Just because we work from home doesn't mean we have that control. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, Kevin, you want to take that one, or you want me to?
Sure. I was going to say I'm happy to go as well. Yeah, I think and I actually think that's a really valid point. I think oftentimes we assume that everyone and not that Justin did or that I do, but I think just naturally in thinking about these solutions, there's a kind of baked in assumption that we do have control over changing things, or that we can say no to meetings, or that we can pick up our kid or take them somewhere in the day, whatever those things may be. And oftentimes it's just not true. And I think in that situation, I think you have a couple options. And I would say first and foremost, actually kind of building on what Justin said in our conversation around how you communicate it. I think that you can actually, it may not be one big leap. It might be a lot of little steps in the right direction. And it's all about starting to make those small steps. So step one might be, trying to look at your calendar and realizing maybe you have meetings from, 8 in the morning until 5 in the evening, and that's very stressful to you. What can you talk to your manager, your leader about to say, hey, right now I'm pretty strapped on this. Is there anything we can do to help just even create some space? Maybe that's, can I just take a little bit of a larger break middle of the day, or finding ways to communicate your needs. Again, I don't think there's the assumption that you will get all of those at once, but ultimately it may be, okay, we try 10 things. And if that doesn't start to move the needle, maybe you end up in a place where you say, this might not work for me. And again, there's an assumption that might be an option. That may not also be an option, and that can be difficult. And I think the other side of that is then when if you've tried everything and you still need to stay with the company you're working for and you're not getting full support, sometimes those are the circumstances, then the question switches kind of to the other side of life of how do you find and create more space there to make sure you're balancing, whether it's restorative time, whether it's just rest, whether it's, trying to get more energy through other hobbies and other ways, and creating those boundaries as best you can, so that when you are done working, you are done working. Then I think that's the other big component that you need to lean to simultaneously is how do you separate? If you absolutely have to separate and not integrate, what do you do to fully separate? So that would be my advice. Justin, I don't know, anything you want to add to that?
No, I really appreciate it, you calling it out, because we, I think often do kind of get in these echo chambers about assumptions that everybody has this flexibility. And I appreciate you naming this. There's even people on my team that work remotely that have interviews every 30 minutes, and there's not much flexibility to that, right? So I think it's knowing what matters to you, stating that, as Kevin said, and then there could be the reality that maybe you find a different job within your organization that does allow for more flexibility if this isn't aligning with where you want to be in terms of life-work balance. So I think that could open up some of those harder conversations that are also an assumption we're making about your access or, availability of those conversations. But I do think it's important. And ultimately, I think you're having to kind of make a choice between the two and what matters most to you at this time.
Cool. Let's go for the next question. So the next question is, how can I start a conversation with my team about having a better work-life balance? As a manager, I worry about my team, but how can I really support them?
I think this is a fantastic question. I was going to say, please, you take it first, Justin.
Yeah, I'm always of the standpoint that, like, if something's on your mind as a manager, bring it to your people. I mean, if you're worried about your team, if you're worried about how you're supporting them with life-work balance, like, I would just bring it. Maybe in your next team meeting, you're spending the first 15, 30 minutes just saying, like, how you hope to support them. What are other ways you could support them? Where are you falling short? And then maybe even baking into your check-ins within each individual, like, what are things that you did in life this week that you're proud of? Or how can I support you as a manager this week to live out more of the life that you hope that you have? Little things like that just naturally get into your systems, your ongoing routines or rhythms that's focusing and centering life in the conversation. And definitely don't just sit on it, especially if you're worried. Do something and bring it up. And if nothing else, that'll relieve your own burden and maybe make you feel a little bit more at ease.
Yeah, and I'll drop a couple tactical ones that we try to practice, or I try to practice with our team. Hopefully, Justine can vouch for these. Some of which are, during one-on-ones, we do a check-in that's sort of just a rating of sort of how they're feeling. That gives us a chance to kind of, at a regular cadence, have a good sense of how are things going? Are we trending in the right or wrong direction for them in what their needs are? And that's not a like, how's your work? It's a how are you question. And then, some of them are reactive, some are proactive. I think Justin is exactly right. Like if you have a feeling, you're probably right, honestly, is at least that's my experience. If you feel it, you probably are already, maybe, I don't want to say a step behind, but it's probably already existing to some extent. And I think sometimes you can do proactive measures to say, hey, I want to make sure everyone gets some time. So like, if you can, we're going to, maybe we're going to cancel these meetings coming up, or we're just going to delay them a week to give everyone a little bit of a break, or we're going to move if you have the flexibility to, let's say, move deadlines or make adjustments to recalibrate some of where your team is. Some of those they seem like super small things, but they can go a really long way, in terms of like, hey, let's have a mental health day. Again, these are assuming you have this kind of control, of course, to the previous question. But there are a lot of little proactive things that you can be doing to sort of take that first step and show them that it's more than anything. It shows the signal of, I do want to encourage this balance. I do want to find ways, and then start a dialogue, like Justin was saying, what else can we do to support you? Where do you feel like there are gaps? How can we promote this in a way that maybe we're not showing up with today? Or maybe just me as a leader, maybe I'm driving some of this and I want to know about it. So I think the fact that you're asking the question means you're probably already the right person and you're probably already in the right headspace. So, congrats to you before we forget to mention that. That's a big step, and not everyone takes that step.
And you got to model it too.
That's right.
So here's another question, and this touches a bit hybrid work, is my assumption. And it's, how can a remote worker create better communication to are ignored? And I think this is really important to like work-life balance, because sometimes when you're not, like having this communication with your team, that can really affect you as a worker.
Yeah, Justin,
there's obviously some.
Yeah,
sure. I mean, there's obviously some very big root issues here. I don't want to try to, diagnose everything that's going on within your organization, but at a baseline, I feel like we have to have a work culture where we're communicating with each other, responding to emails, meetings are being ignored. I mean, that's obviously a very big issue. To me, there's tackling those two problems first, and then coming alongside maybe some more of the cultural issues. Like I said, trust is the engine that makes remote work possible. I would say the same for hybrid. If there's people in the office and you feel like as a remote worker, you are being treated differently, then I think that's something that has to be addressed. Otherwise, you're going to be at a disadvantage working from home, and nobody's going to want that job. So to me, there's some key root issues there. Emails, we've got to respond to emails. Meetings, we've got to show up to meetings. If not, how are we going to get anything done? So this seems like a big problem for maybe organizational leadership to tackle, starting with the communication norms and then working into how do we make sure we're holding people accountable to those communication norms, regardless of where they are, and then dig in from there.
Yep. Nothing to add from mine. That was perfect.
Okay, another question. This is a bit of a long one. I work in an industry whose work interacts with multiple time zones concurrently and with dozens of parties. Talking to managers is not productive. The client dictates, and it is what it is the default response. And so I guess it's pretty hard to have work-life balance when this is how you have to work.
I was going to say, I'm happy to jump in on that one, and actually can very much relate. In fact, my let's say entry to remote work actually sort of came through this form. I won't name names or companies, but I did work for a company where my role was essentially a global role, right? And so I had to work with a bunch of different time zones where I would have calls sometimes at 11 p.m. at night or later, and as early as 4 a.m. my time. And I can say, one, I empathize. It's actually a challenge. It can be really difficult, especially, at least for me, I at that time didn't have a family and had a lot of flexibility in my own kind of schedule. But it took, for me, it took a year to kind of figure out what that meant in terms of how do I reintegrate my life when I've got a call at 11 p.m. at night or 4 a.m. when those aren't my normal call times, for example. And I'll say, what works for me, and I think I kind of mentioned this, and I don't know if this is possible for you, but one thing that worked for me at the time was to sit down with my then boss and talk through, okay, well, if I'm working in these very odd hours, then, what I would like is to be able to, for example, go exercise in the middle of the day, because I've been working from 4 a.m. already to 9 a.m. And I'm 5 hours into my day by the time the rest of my my teammates are just starting work. Can I instead take a break at lunch to go exercise or to do other things if I'm going to be working these strange hours? And luckily for me, that was an option. But I think it comes back to that communication of it sounds like there's not a ton of flexibility there in that default response. And if that's the case, maybe instead of, I'm not saying you're fighting that, but instead of pushing against that, because it doesn't sound like they're going to give much, maybe another option is to say, how can I then again sort of get some back elsewhere? How can I protect if I'm already doing these strange times with clients, which sounds like in a client service business is always difficult? How do I integrate my life back into this space that is being so absorbed by work? That would be kind of my approach, and see if there are negotiations that can move the needle on that.
Justin, anything to add to it?
No, that's spot on. Yeah, what else do we have?
We have one more, and I think it's a bit similar-ish. My team is spread all around the world, and I sometimes feel guilty for not being available to them when they need it. What can I do?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to me, the same values in a leader that stick out to people are going to matter in this situation too. There's obviously some logistical challenges in being spread out across the world that you'll have to navigate. But just like the same recommendation I made about just sharing what's on your heart with your team, I think that's where I would recommend starting, and just naming this tension that you have, naming how you want to support people, and then having the team actually tell you whether you're doing that. Because I think a lot of times as managers, we talk ourselves into maybe something that we're doing or ways that we're falling short. But we're actually, especially if you're asking this question, you're clearly self-aware, and maybe your team sees that and feels it and knows there's a challenge and you're doing your best. But I would say the same exact things that I said previously, where if you're having check-ins with everybody, incorporate it into check-ins. If there's maybe literally never a time when you're awake, when one of your people are awake, how are you all touching base with that in a Google Doc? How are you incorporating aspects of life into that Google Doc or on Slack? Maybe giving some prompts for them when they wake up, little things like that, don't let the time zones get in the way of you leading and managing in the way that you want to. Just look at it as a logistical challenge that you have to overcome, but you can still live out the values that you have.
Kevin, something to add? Or?
No, I think that was perfect. Justin nailed it.
Yeah. Okay, so I think no more questions are coming in. If anyone still has any other question, feel free to add them. But otherwise, we can start maybe just saying our last thoughts on the topic, if both of you want to do that.
Yeah, I'll just say, Justin, first, thanks again so much for being here. Really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure that everyone who's here has found some insight or value from everything you shared, and hopefully I'm going to come away energized from this as always, and I think so will everyone else who's joined. And I think it's really exciting. I think we need to have more conversations with people who are actually leading the charge in the way you are. So, once again, thanks for showing up, and thanks not only for the conversation, but thanks for all you're doing broadly to really change not just the face of work, but the face of kind of this life-work balance, and really helping people live out a new way of being and a new way of kind of, being valued in the world beyond work. So, first, I think thank you so much for all of that.
Of course. Yeah, it was a pleasure to be here. Really look up to the way you all are leading this movement as well. And I know that we got into some difficult topics because it's a counter narrative to, I think, how we've traditionally viewed work, which I think is uncomfortable in itself. And I also think it's not easy to give a one size fits all to this desire to have life work balance, right? So I hope that people were able to take away something. Maybe it's even just the encouragement or maybe confusion about what you take away, which you'll sit with and maybe think through. But, for me, it's challenging because it's not typically a conversation we had, and it doesn't apply to everybody in a clean way. So try to take something from it. And I know that we have more information in a separate session about Tulsa Remote if you are interested about that. I love to have these conversations on LinkedIn as well if people want to add me there. But just super grateful for the platform and really appreciate the way that you're pushing this conversation too, Kevin, and the work that you're doing at We Work Remotely to really lift up the options that employees have in today's new work environment, which I think is only going to continue to grow and thrive.
Excellent. Well, like I said, thank you so much. Justine, is there anything else? Any other questions come in, or should we wrap
Not
it
any
for
other
today?
questions, but I will take this opportunity to tell everyone that we will have a panel on September 20 with also Tulsa Remote. We will talk about everything about finding a community when you are a remote worker. So if you want to join, I will drop the link in the comments there, and we hope to see you there. And thank you so much, Justin. Thank you so much, Kevin. As a reminder, this will stay recorded. So if anyone wants to come back and watch again, take notes, whatever that might be, send it to someone that needs to hear this. You're more than welcome to do it. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
We'll see each other soon, I hope.
All right.
Excellent.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.